Okay, everybody, Miles Kessler here, and welcome to another one of our meditation coaching demonstrations. And today I am with Roman. Roman's last name, just a moment. Oof, where did you go? Polak?
Panek.
Panek, excuse me, Roman Panek.
Hello, everyone.
It's great to have you with us, Roman. Roman's calling today from the Czech Republic. So what I'll do is, Roman also practices Aikido and as well as meditation. So, excuse me, I'm going to read a bit of his background, and then I'll ask you a few questions. And apologies to everyone, I'm still a little sick, so I may cough from time to time. Okay, let's see. Roman, when he registered for this course, he described his meditation experience that he's been practicing meditation on his own for some time, but with no formal study with the teacher. He practices, the method he practices Vipassana, and that's per the instructions from Sam Harris. Sam Harris is a mindfulness-based meditation teacher. Sam does a lot of other stuff, and Sam is actually a very, very smart, intellectual guy. And he has a wonderful podcast called Making Sense, which I highly recommend. And apparently,
Waking Up.
No, it used to be Waking Up. He changed the name to Making Sense because his meditation app is now called Waking Up. So he didn't want to have confusion. But if you look for Sam Harris and Waking Up, you'll find great stuff. So I can highly recommend that. and Roman says he's able to practice about once a week. So he gets to do his practice. Can you tell me a little bit more about your practice, Roman?
Once a week, I will say it's a dedicated time when I decided I make and that I want to make a meditation and I will get down and I will get to it. Other than that, I'm trying a couple of times a day. Every time I'm standing in a line in the store or whenever I feel I cannot concentrate, just simply following my breath and trying to stay just on the breath.
Okay, that's great. So you practice mindfulness throughout the day from time to time?
Yes.
And you do that by following the breath, staying with the breath?
Yes.
It's at the shop when you're shopping or something else, and there's a moment you're waiting, you just turn in.
Whenever I'm feeling like I'm wasting my time, which
Great.
in a line, what else can you possibly do?
Yeah, totally.
Other people at the table pull out their phones, and start checking their emails and everything.
Right.
I will get to it, knowing, being fully aware that I'm gonna fail miserably at this.
Yeah, well, that's how it is with meditation. Now, you also said something about you use meditation also to train your attention.
Very much. When I was a kid, luckily, ADD wasn't around, anything like that, but my mind is a crazy squirrel running everywhere, and right. Realizing this, it gave me such a huge advantage, whether it's in the school or in the class, just being able to focus and knowing that, hey, your brain is trying to run away. And
great.
Focus
Great.
again.
And just about your daily life practice. So when you notice that the mind is busy or that you're waiting or whatever, you use the breath as a way to anchor your mind in the present moment?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's a wonderful method. The breath is just for the people watching, you can use anything to anchor the mind in the present moment, but it's important, I'm saying this not to Roman, to be anybody watching this, that it is important to have an anchor, because otherwise the mind, it can be like a boat in the ocean, and it's just going all over the place. But if you throw out an anchor, the boat won't wander away too far. So if you have something like the breath or a mantra or following the air at the nose or even physical sensations in the body, a body scan, things like that is very important.
Question for you at this point.
Okay.
There is a different level of resistance. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's piece of cake. Other times it feels like a torture trying to follow in the breath and not to think. Okay. And the is just bombing you with a question and other stuff.
That's great. Yes. So what's your question?
How do I deal with that? Because sometimes it's really like wrestling with a bear.
How do you deal with what?
How do I overcome that? Because sometimes the brain is really putting up a lot of resistance, trying to be calmed down.
Well, I mean, there's lots of different strategies depending on what exactly the nature of the resistance. It could be, imagine there's regrets or there's doubts or there's desires or there's fears or there's planning, obsessive planning, just obsessiveness in the mind. There's different strategies that you can use, but ultimately, The only way to deal with it is with mindfulness. And that means that's being with it, with your attention, with your awareness in the present moment, without indulging. Do you know the word indulge, Raman?
Yes.
Without indulging the thought or without resisting the thought. Because let's say when the mind is busy with planning or ruminating or regretting or worrying or fantasizing or desiring or fear, whatever, the mind does its stuff, just singing a song, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's an unconscious mental activity. So it is an activity of the mind, and at some level, usually at an unconscious level, there's agency there. We're doing it somehow. You know, it's happening from the past, whatever. If you try to suppress it, that's also the ego doing something. The sense of self is doing something, so it's still doing. If you try to deny it, it's also the ego doing something. So the ego gets to stay strong in all those cases. It's important to say there's nothing wrong with the ego, that we need the ego, we need the personality. We just want the personality to be a bit more free and open, balanced, healthy, and mature. And the way to do that, just like we pay attention to the mental states, the way to do that is by detaching and observing with mindfulness. Mindfulness neither indulges, nor denies, nor resists. It doesn't, you said it's like wrestling with a bear sometime. That's
Yes.
the inner battle. That's the ego fighting the ego. The self is fighting, this part of my brain is fighting this part of my brain. So it's still that struggle. Now, it can be really challenging and even depressing to see how much the mind is just nonstop busy. So take care that you don't have the goal to stop the mind. It's crazy what goes on the mind, but kind of unconsciously we think, okay, I'm going to do meditation and I'm going to stop all the mental activity. If you have that intention, if you have that goal, you'll probably create more thinking in the mind. The goal is simply to be able to detach and observe what's arising in the mind. And by doing that, we are no longer adding fuel to the thought. So say a thought comes up about, it could be a fantasy, or it could be a desire, or it could be, I'm angry at somebody I spoke to and I keep thinking about them. This person did that, or regrets I did something in the past, or I didn't do something in the past, or whatever, all the stuff that comes up in the mind. We usually unconsciously keep feeding it by staying identified and thinking. So it's like putting fuel. We're just adding more fuel and the fire keeps burning. Or
Yes.
we resist it, or we deny it, but that's also adding fuel to it and it keeps burning. The only way to put out the fire is to detach and be aware with mindfulness of fire. Or if it's imagining regrets. So regret's a common thought that comes up. Oh, I should have done this, or I didn't do that. So you see the regret's coming up. The moment you're aware that there's a regret, detach and observe and be with the regret. And by being with the regret, with mindfulness, neither indulging it or resisting it, then the fuel will slowly burn out, and at a certain point it'll disappear. But the only way to take away the fuel is with mindfulness. And mindfulness is this beautiful, beautiful kind of capacity in our mind. Every single person can do it. This amazing capacity to detach and observe what's happening in experience. And then that experience will process itself until it's gone. It's the easiest practice in the world. It also happens to be, it's not easy. It's the simplest practice in the world. It also has to be one of the most difficult practices in the world, because it's not easy to do mindfulness. So now what I just said to you is if you're at work, or if you're at home, or if you're standing in line at the market, like you said, or if you're meditating. So why don't we talk about your meditation? We'll just kind of shift right into your meditation. Tell me what you do when you sit down to meditate.
I don't prefer that much to do it sitting. Usually I like to be on the bed.
Okay. Lying meditation.
Yes.
Sure. No problem.
I will start breathing. what I noticing is how much tension there is usually in my body. And that comes
Even lying down, you notice the tension.
even lying down. There can be so much tension that you are unaware of.
And why is the tension there from, do you have stress in your job or something like that?
Well, my job, I would say, is highly stressful.
Okay.
That's okay. I usually can deal with stress. That's one of my strong point is ability to perform under the stress.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't expect how much of it you take in with you. You know, it's
exactly.
And suddenly you realize that your shoulders are tense, your stomach is tense, your legs completely cramped up, you know, and it takes a while, and it almost feels like stepping out of the armor or something.
Yes.
When you suddenly start dissolving and you start feeling somewhat vulnerable.
Okay, good. So let's back up. So you do your lying meditation. Mm-hmm. You notice that there's a lot of tension. Sometimes there's a lot of tension in the body. And by observing that, you start to see the tension dissolving. And you realize, oh, wow, there was a lot of tension. And you said it's like taking off armor?
Yes.
Okay, good. And now, so continue.
It does feel like that. And at that moment, what I'm trying to do, that's when I deviate slightly from a SEM. I'm trying to focus the breathing in the part where I feel the tension.
Great.
Seems to be kind of...
You take the tension as an object of meditation.
Yes. And it's usually for a brief moment, you know, a couple of seconds. Imagine your breath is flowing into that part. There is something you can feel, something with your right scapula. So you imagine as you breathe in, you breathe into that.
Okay, great. So you visualize the breath moving into the parts of tension.
Yes.
And you notice what? When you do that, let's say the scapula, back here, I have something in my scapula too, coincidentally. So you're meditating, and you feel the tension. So you visualize your breath going into the area of tension, and then what happens?
You become aware of that part, and you usually realize what is pulling where. Like you know, you really become aware of it, and the best way to describe it, you become able to somewhat let it go.
Very good. So what I want to know from you is, let's say there's an area of tension around the scapula, for example. It's just an example. And you breathe into it. You become aware of all the different places that are pulling. Because you're observing, there's a letting go. But what I want to know is what happens to the tension, kind of phenomenologically. Does it explode? Does it drop? Does it spread?
It drops. It becomes much better, and usually the sensation...
It becomes what?
It becomes loose.
Okay, so it looses.
So you
said it becomes better.
Yes.
That means you prefer it when it like loose is better, tight is worse?
Tight is worse, yes.
Okay, you have to be careful of this. Because if there's a preference in the mind, I mean, everybody, loose is more pleasant, yeah? Mm-hmm. Tight is less pleasant. It can be extremely unpleasant. And naturally, the mind has desire for more pleasance and aversion for unpleasantness. But you have to be careful of a slight preference in the mind for pleasant experience, because that will stop your meditation. So if you notice that there's a desire for something better, then you have to drop the tension for a moment and pay attention that there's a desire or an expectation or an agenda. Because if that agenda is there, it'll stop the meditation. Now, it will, like I said, it's the same thing with the goal. If you have the goal, what did I say before? Just excuse me one second. If you have the goal, what did I say at the beginning? Oh my gosh, I forgot.
There is an expectation in the meditation that's actually fueling the resistance.
Exactly, it's the same thing with the tension in the body. If you have the goal to get rid of the tension, like for example, going to massage and doing even some Aikido exercise, it can be very good for releasing the tension, and so we do that. But with the meditation, with mindfulness, you want to just be mindful, and when you're just mindful, there's 3 things that can happen. Let's say for example, with tension, it will become more intense. The unpleasant feeling can become more intense. The unpleasant feeling can become less intense, or it can stay the same. And with mindfulness, you don't want to manipulate that process. You want to allow it to happen by itself. That's what I was saying before about fueling the experience. Just detach and observe. Now, if you have, let's say, if you really have a problem, you feel like you need to do some stretching, to do some breathing exercises, then by all means do that. I'm not saying don't do that. That's okay. But eventually you want to let go and just be present with the experience. So when I asked you what happens to the tension, you started to explain to me what you do to the tension.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not a problem, but just remember, it's not meditation. Meditation is just
Makes
being
perfect sense when you put it like that.
Yeah. So you want to, phenomenologically, what happens to the tension? So you said it gets better. That means it probably starts to loosen up, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then what else?
Whenever I feel, and it usually takes like a minute or two, that
Mm-hmm.
finally relaxed, I just start breathing naturally. Well, naturally, I train myself at one point to breathe into the one point, right?
Okay, good. Yeah, sure. Like we do in Aikido.
That's the
Right, right.
method of breathing, you know. But that's
Yeah,
when I start to observing it, and
yeah.
that's when you start to follow Sam's instruction, you know, just noticing where the breath is most difficult, where there are
Yeah.
difficulties.
And just notice it.
Yes.
Don't manipulate it. Don't change it.
Not
Great.
trying to manipulate it in any way whatsoever. At
Great,
that
great.
point, I realize how my brain is screaming different information at a constant rate. That is a thing that has to be experienced. When you, for the very first time, try to meditate,
Oh, no, it's crazy, yeah.
that thing is yelling at me.
Yeah. You see a full-grown man break down to crying when you realize how difficult it could be. But it's important to see that. It's important to see that. I want to go back to what you said before, because let's say you see that you start to see the armor comes off, there's a looseness that's happening, and then you said that you start to feel more vulnerable when the armor starts to go away. Tell me about that.
You feeling like you're going through the world, through your day in some state of mind, you know, when you are ready to deal with anything, tackle anything, you know, when you actually try to relax, suddenly all this attention and being in a certain mindset, it goes away.
Great.
And you don't want to be in that position for the first time because you are ready to be attacked at any point without a warning, you know.
Yeah, and you're ready to respond freely.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. Great.
And suddenly you feel like, hey, I'm not in that mindset, you know, and it's a new place. If that's the way you live, that is a very new place to be.
I see what you're saying. So you're like on guard. You feel you notice that the mind is always on guard.
Yes.
And then as you do that, that relaxes, and then it's a bit more open.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more free place to be.
Basically diminishing your personal zone, you know, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So.
Yeah. And ironically, you get more space because what you feel is your boundary diminishes or dissolves or relaxes, and you're actually opening up to much more.
Yes, that would be a way to describe it.
Now, you said something about a lot of when you notice how much the mind is screaming at you to do this, to do that. A lot of mental activity.
You try to follow the breath and immediately something pops up. Like you said, someone I didn't like that day, some problem, something I didn't do. And now it already makes sense with what you said. Sometimes the meditation can be a beautiful thing that relaxes you and you are just fine and you fall asleep while doing it and it's awesome. Sometimes it's a struggle and that's, adding the fuel, like you said. Sometimes it can be very, very difficult, even stressful. And it's actually wake you up and then you have insomnia for the rest of the night.
Yeah, right. For example.
Usually, like you said, when you come with the expectation, this is gonna be beautiful.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right.
Gonna be fine.
So let me ask you this: are you familiar with the teaching of the Five Hindrances?
No.
Okay, so let's kind of. I think it's important that we speak about that at this point because the sense of self or the ego has the delusion. This is straight out of spirituality, straight out of Buddhism, that we have a delusion, a misunderstanding. We perceive that ourselves is a fixed reality, a solid, fixed, continuous reality. But the fact is, the spiritual truth is that there is nothing solid about the sense of self. There's no underlying core, like, you know, this is a solid table here. When you really look deeply into the self through mindfulness and introspection and contemplation, you'll realize that there's nothing there. There's no miles in there to actually touch. Now, when you start to apply mindfulness, just by simply watching the breath or watching the sensations in the body or watching the mind, the ego doesn't like that, because that's actually the antithesis of what the ego does. Excuse me. The ego wants to stay solid and fixed and permanent, whereas the flow of mindfulness will show you the truth that things are not solid and things are impermanent, that they're constantly changing. So the ego has this beautiful defense mechanism, just like, you know, you have a country, the borders around the Czech Republic, or I hate to use Israel as an example because it's there's a lot of political stuff happening here. But let's say, in principle, a country has its border and they're attacked from the outside. The country sends the army, the defenses, to the borders to protect the borders. The ego does the same thing. Whenever we perceive a threat from the outside, or we perceive a threat from the inside with mindfulness, the ego defense mechanisms come up. And in meditation, everybody experiences these things differently, but in meditation, there are very clearly 5 defense mechanisms. These are called the 5 hindrances. And as soon as you start to try to activate mindfulness and concentration, the ego puts up these defenses. And the first one it puts up is desire. A sensual desire for something good to taste or see or smell or think about or feel or listen to. So there's a desire that can come in the mind. If you act on the desire or you start thinking about some pleasant thought, then the meditation stops. The ego did its job, meditation stops.
Yes.
The second hindrance that can come up is the opposite of desire. Desire basically says there's an object out there and I want that, and it reaches to bring it in here, because I'm not enough unless I get that. So that's the desire. That'll take you out of meditation. The second one is aversion, which is the opposite of that. There's an experience here that I don't want, and I want to push it away. That's the aversion. It could be this cough that I have, I don't like it. It could be that person over there. It could be the lights. Today is a very rainy day. Oh, I don't like the rain. Excuse me. The mind always finds something to have aversion towards. Mm-hmm. Okay. The third hindrance that comes up is sleepiness. So you start to meditate, and then suddenly, you know, you start nodding off and drifting off and falling asleep. If you act on desire, if you indulge desire, if you indulge aversion, and if you indulge sleepiness, the meditation stops. The fourth hindrance is the opposite of sleepiness, which is restlessness. The mind is jumping around. Very, very busy. There's insomnia. You can't sleep. The mind just won't settle down. If you engage or indulge the restlessness or struggle with it, the meditation stops. And the fifth of the 5 hindrances is the hindrance of doubt. Doubt that meditation works, doubt that there are these teachers like the Buddha, doubt that the people who practice meditation, they're not doing anything. Or self-doubt, doubt in yourself. I can't do this. Other people can do it, but I can't do it. Now, these 5 things will arise in your practice. It's not a question of if, it will arise in your practice. And if you don't navigate them and negotiate them and work with them with mindfulness, they'll stop the meditation practice. But if you manage to work with them with mindfulness, detaching and observing, neither indulging or struggling or resisting, but just detaching and observing, they'll come, they'll stay for a while, they'll disappear. And the moment that these things stop being active in the mind, you'll access concentration. Now, here's what access concentration means, Roman. It means that you start to see the tension in the shoulder relax and melt away. Whether you're able to follow the breath for the full breath on the in-breath or the full breath on the out-breath, or that the mind suddenly becomes quiet. So the moment whenever in meditation you notice that there's moments of quietness or you're seeing a process unfold, you'll know that you then have concentration. It might even be just 1 moment or 2 moments or 3 moments or 1 minute. But whatever it is, it's good. And then the hindrances can come back. It takes some time to work with the defense mechanisms of the mind. But what you need to understand is that the defense mechanisms in the mind, the five hindrances, desire, aversion, sleepiness, restlessness, and doubt, they're not happening in spite of the meditation. They're happening because of the meditation. That you activated mindfulness and then these things arise. So it's good. It means that it's actually, oh, now things are interesting. Now it's starting to happen. Usually our kind of egoic mind sees, oh, these things are bad. I want to meditate. These things are problematic. Well, no, you're meditating and they come up and they visit you and they go and they come and they go and they come. They visit many times. But your job as a yogi, as a meditator, is to just be patient, be persistent, and to persevere, to allow your attention to last longer than the desires, the fears, the aversions, the sleepiness, the restlessnesses, and the doubt. And only when you negotiate through those will you access concentration, will you then access the inner path of meditation. Okay?
There is a lot of things that actually make perfect sense.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. This meditation, it's been around millennia. Just in Buddhism, it's 2,500 years, and these teachings, they're just passed on from one person to the next for 2,500 years with no break, because they make a lot of sense in a way. They're logical, but then when you practice, Raman, you're going to see that that's actually true. You know, it sounds like your lying meditation is working well. Yeah. Continue to look at the tension in the body. I would say when you start to feel the tension go away, use the breath as your primary object. Stay with the breath as long as possible, or as consistently as possible. Use it as your home base. Always return to the breath. But then should thoughts arise, and first recognize, okay, thinking, but in a neutral way, kind of accept it, thinking, and then recognize the kind of thinking. Is this aversion? Is this desire? Is this my mind getting lazy? Or is it just restlessness like monkey mind or insomnia? Or do I have doubts? And then be very careful not to indulge or struggle with, but rather simply be mindful. Now, last thing I want to say is, if you see you're indulging a thought, imagine there's a thought about ice cream. So you're thinking about ice cream, whatever. It could be something better or worse, whatever. But you find yourself thinking about it a lot. It's very easy to judge yourself. Ah, shit, I can't even do this. I can't even meditate. So if you notice that, then take care not to judge it. Just accept it. If you notice there's judgment about yourself or about other people, then be mindful. Judgment. That's accept that and be mindful of the judgment. And then just go on with the practice.
It's funny how you spoke about the 5 defense mechanisms and you perfectly described my meditation.
Well, the thing is, it perfectly describes everybody's meditation. Now, everybody experiences those, your desire is going to be, unique to you. I have my unique desires. Your aversions and my aversions, they'll be unique. I guess sleepiness is the same. But the point is that these hindrances are kind of universal. Some people experience more or less going through the practice, but they do arise for everybody. So take care. And remember, if they're arising, your basic attitude, this is good. Now the practice, it's having an effect. Mindfulness is ultimately a psychoactive technology of the mind. So the moment you activate mindfulness, it's actually activating your psychology, or you could say psycho-spiritually, because it also activates your spirituality. And the ego will start to do everything it can to stop that process.
It does. It definitely does.
Yeah, and it's like when you go to the gym and you're lifting weights or something, you're doing Aikido and you're getting more stronger, more effective in a technique. Every time that there's a challenging mental state arising and you're just mindful of it, you're developing mindful muscles. Every time you indulge it, the mindfulness is not being developed. Every time you notice it, it is being developed. So
I wouldn't believe how much material you gave me to work on.
That's great.
Just connected the dots and make a sense.
So here's let me see if I can just wrap this up for you in kind of simple instructions. Continue to do your lying meditation and your daily mindfulness practice. Sounds awesome. Do the scan where you find the tension in the body, yeah. But then when you've kind of done that after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever it is, remember when you're noticing the tension, be careful of having a agenda to make the tension go away. Just be mindful of it. Now it might get stronger, but eventually it'll disappear. Okay. When you've done your body scan, go to the breath and follow precisely the in breath and the out breath, and specifically the physical sensations you feel on the in breath. Like there'll be tension and movement and stretching and contraction, and maybe it may be cold, it may be warm, it may be a long breath, it may be a short breath, whatever it is. Just be mindful of the in breath, and be mindful of the out breath, moment by moment, breath by breath. When you're doing that, naturally things are going to come up in the mind, especially if you had a busy day. Should things come up in the mind, and leave the breath and put a mental label, thinking. That helps you to detach and observe. Or if you notice that it's planning, or if it's a fantasy, or if it's a desire or anger or aversion or judgment, whatever it is, put a mental label, judgment, thinking. And then as that thought relaxes, return to the breath. Okay, and then be aware that these, in fact, the next time you meditate, you're going to kind of already be aware of it, but be aware of the desire, aversion, sleepiness, restlessness, and doubt. These are good signs, meaning the practice is activated, but if you're not mindful of them, it'll stop you. So you want to go through those, and then if you notice the moment that the mind becomes quiet, or that you're able to stay with the breath for a few breaths, or that you're able to stay with the tension and watch it process, then really just gently give your mindfulness completely to that moment, and moment by moment, extend your practice. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. And the last thing, when you finish the practice, do a quick check-in with your body. How do you feel in the body? How do you feel in the mind? And then when you get up, carry that feeling state with you.
Okay.
All right. That's it, Roman. So this is going to be recorded. I'll put it up on YouTube probably, if I have time today, I'll do it today. Otherwise, it'll be up there in a few days. But I won't post it to my blog until maybe January, the beginning of January. So you'll get an email about that, okay?
Not a problem. If it will help to anyone else, fantastic. You gave me so much information, and so many things started making sense.
That's like, great, Roman. Fantastic.
I got a lot of things to work on.
That's good. And Roman, I have a few things coming up in January. There's like a free online training with meditation that you can take, and it even goes into deeper to what we were speaking about now. And I'd be happy if you join me in those activities.
I will follow you.
Great, Roman. Thank you so much, and I want to wish you all the best.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you and yours. Enjoy your Israel, and hopefully we will talk sometimes again.
That's great, Roman. Thank you, and I'm happy to hear about your practice.
Thank you.
All right, all the best.